Yo, partnership alert, partnership alert, partnership alert. Living Corporate has a partnership with LinkedIn Learning, an American massive open online course provider that provides video courses taught by industry experts across a wide array of subjects. Now, the partnership is because Living Corporate has courses on LinkedIn Learning focused on diversity, equity, inclusion for leaders, career professionals, and anyone really looking to upskill themselves and be better allies. So make sure you check out our courses on LinkedIn Learning by clicking the link in the show notes. And let's just say you don't want to do that. When you go to LinkedIn Learning on LinkedIn, search Living Corporate. We'll be right there. All right. Peace. What's up, y'all? This is Zach with Living Corporate. Listen, I am really excited about today's pod. We talk a lot about entrepreneurship, and we've even we've delved into the VC space, but I don't know how much we've talked about like being a Black founder, specifically in tech, but even outside of tech, and how to create systems and structures that don't leave you vulnerable or exploited. And so I'm really excited about today's guest, Kimberly Bryant, who's a variety of things, from being an educator and a mentor and a public speaker. She's also most commonly known as the founder of Black Girls Code. And she and I have been in communication for some years now. I'm finally really honored and happy that she was able to make time for us on Living Corporate. You hear me joke with her a little bit about that. But listen, I really can't wait for y'all to check into this interview, okay? So I'm not even gonna do too much on this intro. What I want us to do is I want us to tap in with Tristan, and then you're gonna hear the interview we have with Miss Bryant, and then we'll be back, all right? See you soon.
What's going on, Living Corporate? It's Tristan, and I want to thank you for tapping back in with me as I provide some tips and advice for professionals. Today, let's talk about a method to help you develop new habits. Have you ever tried to start doing something new but had difficulty sticking to it? Maybe you want to read more, go to the gym, take some classes, or even begin searching for a job. Well, habit stacking is a methodology that can help you create new habits incrementally. Habit stacking is the idea that you can create a new habit by piggybacking off an already established habit. This behavioral science strategy helps you make strong connections in an effort to pick up that new habit. Let's talk about how it works. First, choose one new habit to focus on at a time. When you settle on the habit you want to focus on, you can figure out the time that makes sense to work on the new habit. For example, if you're looking to learn a new skill online, it might make the most sense to do that over your lunch break or in the morning over coffee. Next, leverage a well-established habit as an anchor. Things like your morning routine, morning coffee, eating lunch at noon, or even taking the dog out are all habits. To habit stack, pick an anchor habit like those that is well established and tie your new habit to the old one. Lastly, you want to start small. If you're looking to learn a skill, start with 5 minutes of learning a day or take a course for as long as it takes you to eat a meal. The idea is that you want to create small successes to reinforce the new habit. Habit stacking can be a great tool to use in the workplace to learn a new skill or improve your time management. Test it out and see how it goes for you. This tip was brought to you by Tristan of Layfield Resume Consulting. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Layfield Resume, or connect with me, Tristan Layfield, on LinkedIn.
Kimberly Bryant, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. You know, this is a long time coming. I'm really thankful. You know, I've been in your DMs, not thirsty, but I would say respectfully thirsty since 2019. I feel like it's a loaded question, but ask anyway. How are you doing?
I am doing better than could be expected, given all the things going on in the world at large, and some of the things going on in my world, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for every day to be able to get up and continue to walk in some purpose and do some of the things that I love and things I care about. So I'm here.
Well, I'm thankful that you're here, and we're going to talk about the world at large and the world of Miss Kimberly Bryant at the same time.
All right.
Let's talk a little bit about your name is most commonly associated with Black Girls Code. I'm curious as to like what was the initial mission and passion and purpose behind creating Black Girls Code all those moons ago?
So, as the story has been told by myself, primarily, but others as well, many times, time and time again, I created Black Girls Code primarily to support my daughter Kai and her interest in computer science and technology. And when this organization came to fruition, it was way back, almost 11 years ago now, in 2010, when Kai was starting to express some interest in technology and learning about coding, primarily from the lens of being a heavy gamer. And as I, look for opportunities here in the Bay Area, this is where we lived then, and we're still here now. But at that time, this coding for kids was just starting to kind of percolate as something that was happening in different pockets all over the city and all over the Bay Area. And as I was getting her involved in these external workshops and events, I was finding that those venues did not have very many students of color, very few girls in them. And this idea for creating Black Girls Code was really birthed because I saw a need, I saw a gap, and I wanted my daughter to know that she was not the only little Black girl interested in these things. And I wanted her to feel a community, of other techies and geeky girls that like some of the same things she was interested in. And so I created the organization primarily for that reason, to really support her and her passion for technology.
The STEM space continues to be where the future is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as I think about like just coding, like just the very act of coding and like being able to understand the language of these machines and these networks, I'm curious, like, what is your prediction for like Black folks in STEM this decade, right? So we look up in 2030. What things do you expect to see?
That's a great question, Zach. And I'm thinking about a conversation I had earlier this morning with an organization that's doing some work with educators, specifically in K through 12, and talking to them about this, concept around the future of learning. And one of the things that I shared with them is that, what I created within Black Girls Code, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, was really based on this notion of what we were teaching from a frame of reference based on where we were and where we were going with Web 2. And what I shared with them, it was like, well, but I no longer think that is where we are going as a tech industry. I don't think we're going to stay in that realm of Web 2, although there's robust debate on either side. I think, Web 3 is here to stay. And I think that means that what we teach this generation and future generations about technology and an intersection of technology with creativity, and even that intersection with ownership of your work and what you are creating in this community-based, decentralized technology world is very different than what we were doing back in 2010. We were teaching students how to build a website, or we were teaching them how to build a mobile app. We're teaching them frameworks that they did not own and have ownership of. And that's very different than I think what we need to teach now. And I think where the tech industry is going is very different when we think of it from the realm of Web3, decentralized networks, ownership and creativity, So approaching technology from a left brain and right brain perspective means that our students of the future and Black people, certainly as creatives, are now not seeing such a distinction. So I see creatives, that are people of color that are tapping into the Web3, as a source of being able to get that work out into the world. I see students like my daughter, who is an artist and a techie, seeing ways that she can leverage her creative, interests and still be able to, also be a technologist. And I think that's important, that we don't have to segregate creativity from the A in STEAM, the artistic part of what that sits in this. When we talk about STEAM, that's really here now. Like, we talked about that a lot for the last 10 years, but this is like truly evidence of what that means when we talk about creativity in the field of STEM. And I think that requires us as educators, as parents, as people in the industry, to really rethink our frame of reference when we talk about what technology is, what it has been, and where it's going in the future.
It's interesting. Like, I've been having, so maybe you can help educate me in real time and the folks listening in on Living Corporate. Like, have you been plugged into like this whole, like, these DAOs? I think that's what they're called.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so let me tell you like my perspective, and I want you to check me around. Like, Zach, that's not how it is or whatever. But so it's funny. I was talking to like this VC firm because I was exploring like maybe Living Corporate should get into VC, or like, I didn't know, right? I was just like trying to learn or whatever, and so I got connected to this group, and they were really specifically helping folks turn their companies into DAOs. And we were talking, and I was like, okay, so help me understand, like, who has control of the DAO? He's like, well, everybody has control. Like, it's decentralized. Like, everyone, the organization, it's by vote. And he was kind of at a high level explaining it to me, and I Googled a couple things. My challenge with like some of these things, that when they talk about like some of these movements, quote unquote, that seem to talk about decentralization, Kimberly, is like, it feels disempowering to me as a Black founder who created something so that I could have control outside of like these racist corporate contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, it's confusing to me that like why historically marginalized people would create something only to cede their power to like a big anonymized or semi-anonymized group. Like, what am I missing?
I don't think you're missing anything, and I think what
Oh no,
you
that's terrible.
no, I think is good, because I think understanding it is power, right? It's part of understanding knowledge is power. So one of the words that you said was power, like ceding my power as a founder of color for something I created. And I think that is what this is all about. It is power. It is re-envisioning what power looks like for us, right? So I think, like I'm always thinking about this concept of, we can't create something different using the master's tools, right? So as we seek to like do something different from, because of all the racial trauma that we've experienced as, professionals and just Black people of color in the world, and then we get our own. I think we often try to recreate, what we experienced from what we think is the seat of power, the seat of control, right? And we think that makes it all better. But I'm here to tell you that it does not. So, like, I'm telling you, like, it does not make it better. Like, it makes it different, because now we are the ones sitting in that seat of authority. We're the one with the positional authority, the positional power. But all those issues that we experience, they're still there, because we're trying to recreate the same model that we experienced when we were disenfranchised. And I think what these new concepts of shared power, shared authority, allow us to envision is like, how could we do it differently, right? How could we innovatively share power and control in a way that's more empowering of others, and not putting one person at this top of the pyramid and everybody beneath it. So I'm not saying that it's right. I'm not saying that, the other way, this Dow is wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's a different way for us to envision how we may be able to democratize power in a way that everyone feels a part, everyone feels empowered and not disempowered, even if it's a Black person at the top of the pyramid, right? So it's not going to be that. It's like, this is a way that we democratize control, and I think that's very different than what we're all used to, and which sometimes makes it difficult for those of us who've been, myself included. Like, I'm gonna be honest right here. Let me keep it real. Like, it's difficult for me because I understand, it's like, what it is to build something from nothing, and then have others that come in and are still contributing to the work. But you're thinking like, well, but I did all this work to build this, and now you're questioning my authority. Well, yeah, they are questioning our authority. And that's okay. But we got to get comfortable with that being okay. And I think these models allow us to actually have a tangible tool to I would say, wrestle with this notion of, as I said, creating more equity in these structures that allow shared control.
So, one, thank you. I appreciate the context. And I hear you about the idea of things needing to be different. I think for me, and this is on me, right? I think this is like a lesson for everybody, is like just learning and getting all the information you can. Cause like I initially got nervous because I was like, I don't really understand this. And then two, like I'm still trying to get this thing like up to where like I want it to get to I want to get living corporate to a certain place. And so why would I do this right before, like while we're on the cusp of doing all this really dope stuff? We're about to release a bunch of stuff this year, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to the other point you said around like that racialized trauma also kicked in of like, well, nah, because I've seen where like, I'm the face, but then I'm also getting like people, there's a bunch of people on the back end, or man, I'm just one voice, even though I was bait and switched. And so trying to avoid all those things can kind of, I think, have you maybe missing out on trying something different or something radically different. So I received that.
And the thing about it is that my daughter, as I said, I created Black Rose Code for, it was initially one of her passions, very young, at a very young age, was art, and she's an artist, she's a musician, and one of the things that she found her way into doing in Web3 is being a part of this DAO with other artists, other Black artists that are creating these events, these activities, these art activations around all of these amazing Web3 artists. And they have a DAO. And I think I am not personally in a DAO, although I, certainly active in the Web3 space. I'm not in a DAO personally. And listening to her experience and how she moves as a member of this DAO, but not the only one, it is even eye-opening for me, because I'm a person who has been a founder and has led a life that's very different than the one she's creating with her fellow partners. So we often have these conversations because I'm like, well, who's making the decisions? Who, you're in a funding call? Well, who's on the call? Who's going to be talking to this potential funder in VC? And she's like, well, we all are. And I was like, well, that's never going to work. Like somebody, because, that is what I know. And I think, it's been such a gift to be able to be here and witness her on this journey, where to her, it makes all of the sense in the world to, share these decisions with her other co-founders. Or even, I had a conversation with her about something regarding their funding, or how they should perhaps pay themselves, and, and not just do all this work and put all the work into the business. And I asked her about it a day or so after, and she was like, "Yeah, we just voted on that, and so yeah, we're going to start doing that." So it wasn't that like one person got to make that decision, which is would have been in my world. It was like, "Oh yeah, we talked about that and we voted on it, so we're going to do it." And I was like, "Wow, like this is really a different way for us to interrogate how we hold power as a people, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as innovators." And I think it could possibly, create more equitable ways of how we work and how we create. And I'm pretty excited about what that may become in the future, even if I'm not the one doing it right now.
It's just, and I think it's to your point though, like, and you and I have talked about this like privately, and I know I've said it publicly, is like, you're right that we can't expect, one, as like just black folks and certainly black founders and creatives, like we can't use the same tools that oppressors use on us. We can't use them against on one another and think that we're going to be successful, and we can't use them, period, expect some radically different outcome,
Mm-hmm.
or any frankly, any positive, sustainable outcome. Even white folks using these capitalistic tools. I mean, we're looking around. The world is on fire right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
but let's do this now, because we 17 minutes, almost 18 minutes in. We're gonna talk about that one thing.
Okay.
All right. So, so, so help me understand what's going on with you today in Black Girls Code. What I read the headlines. I see, you didn't come to me for the exclusive. I saw you went to a couple other, bigger brands. We can talk about that later. But what's really going on? Like, give me. I don't want the tea. I want the real. Like, what's going on?
Well, okay, you want the real. So back in like I say, back in 1969, but I'm gonna take you about that back that far. But I will say that back in 2020, and I've thought about this a lot lately. Back in 2020, we really started to go through this radical transformation as an organization, as many companies were going through in 2020 when the pandemic hit. And for Black Girls Code, the impact was pretty significant in that, we've been doing all this work for almost 10 years by that time. And every single thing that we were doing, reaching almost, 6,000 students a year was in person. Like everything and all of these 15 chapters that we have was in person workshops, in person events. So the impact of the pandemic on us was, it was drastic in that we had to shut down everything, including, shutting down the two offices that we have, in California and New York, and take all of our teams virtual by the almost a little bit for the middle. So like Q2 of 2020, we came up with this approach to still being able to reach our students and, shifted into this virtual model and started to do all of our workshops online, started to really engage with a even broader community, and we saw our numbers soar. And then the summer of 2020 hit, the summer of resistance threw us another, curve in our pathway, a good, somewhat, quote unquote, um, curve out of the adversity of the murder of George Floyd, from the standpoint that the organization's profile became elevated. And as a result of that, we got an avalanche of support and saw our revenues um, increase exponentially. So the organization increased its revenues from about, $5 to $6 million a year to over $30 million in that 1 year. So we were going through all this change, but we were doing it, in the midst of this pandemic, this global pandemic, and the organization was still growing, and we were not growing together from the standpoint that nobody was seeing each other in the office, but we were still hiring people because we had to keep up with all of this demand and this growing wave of support that we have. We doubled our team, more than doubled our team, but by the end of 2020. So as we came into 2021, that's when we started to feel the impact of all those changes that were happening in 2020. And we started to have some unrest, for lack of a better term, within some pockets of the organization. We had, like many other companies, we started to have feel impacts of this great resignation. So I know it wasn't just us, but we certainly felt it as well. But some of the folks that left our organization left, well, this could be for other companies too, but there were certainly folks that left Black Girls Code that were not happy about their experiences there. And they complained to our board of directors. And as a result of those complaints from a couple of folks that left the organization in 2021, the board of directors decided to do an investigation. And but before they started that investigation, they suspended me because a lot of these folks were unhappy and particularly pointed a finger at me. And it started this whole wave of a battle, if you will, between myself and these folks that were on my board of directors who made this the decision to move me out of the way while they purported to do an investigation. And that's, that's the real. That's no tea. I don't know if that's no tea, but that's the specifics of what went down. And, this internal battle, if you will, it continues with me really pushing to have transparency in terms of what this investigation is all about. And, this some members of the board sticking to um, I don't know what's the good word for it, or not being very willing to be as forthright and transparent with me about what the issues actually are. And so we're still kind of at a standstill between myself and them organizationally, but the organization has continued to do work, and there are folks there that are still, driving the work with our students and our chapters, and hopefully we'll continue to do this work, for many, many, many years into the future. But at the moment, I am not there, being the one in the driver's seat doing it.
I remember the news when it came out, and you initially made a tweet, and then some other folks had some things to say, and folks pointed to Glassdoor, to your point around complaints. And I guess for me, it's like, how does it feel, right? I don't know. Like, I can't imagine. Like, let's say if I brought a bunch of folks in to, like, we don't Living Corporate doesn't have a board, right? Like, we have an advisory. We're building out our advisory board. We don't have like a board of directors, right? Zach is in charge, and I listen to and seek a lot of feedback from mentors and people that I know love me and that I love. But in terms of, like, okay, what's our direction? What's our strategy? Those decisions fall on me. What part of just the initial process when you found out, hey, I'm suspended, like, I don't want to say what was the first feeling that came, but maybe what surprised you the most about that, the way that you were told? Like, what about that was probably like the most just kind of like blindsiding for you?
Well, I think for me, and what it was then and what it remains to date, is just a deep feeling of betrayal. That's to put it out there and keep it real. Like, it was a deep sense of betrayal, like deep betrayal, because I felt, and I still do, like there was such an injustice in how this was really executed, and how it was done. It's like, it's just, there was such a deep level of unfairness to it, and and that's hurtful as a person that, like, I started this organization with my darn 401k. That was how we started this organization. And for those people that are in my network and, like, that are in my community that know me well, they know that like in the beginning, it was just me, my little 401k, and an intern. And we built this organization on our back, and for years, all of this work that folks know about Black Girls Code and the work and the level of really, I would say, visibility the organization has gained over the last 10 years. We eventually were able to build a team and now the organization is really kind of just starting to scale because we finally have resources to do it. But before that, I did so much work to get us to where we are. Like I had to literally move mountains, and so to do all of that work and then to bring in folks on a quote unquote advisory board of directors that is supposed to help me do this work, that didn't join until much later. We didn't have this board until 2018, when a lot of that heavy lifting had been done. And to, kind of like get the organization, through a whole pandemic, like the panorama was no joke. Like I was up and, carrying a lot of that burden by myself because, I was afraid my team wouldn't even live. Like, that's what everybody at that time was thinking.
And people was dying, to be clear.
People was dying. People lost people. But, like, I felt like in 2020 was probably, at the time, I felt 2020 was one of the hardest years of my life as a founder. But, now I might revisit that. But it was hard. It was very hard, and I had to do a lot of that journey alone, in the seat as a leader. And so to come back and the end of 2021, where we really were doing work to, address, some of the friction within the organization and not have a supportive board to help us get through that, it hurt and it felt like betrayal, and it just felt very unjust and unfair. And it still feels that way. But I also feel that everything happens for a reason. And I think that, my calling and my mission here is still very clear of what I need to do. And it probably expanded that a bit now. What type of things need to change, around board governance and how we support, founders and leaders of color that do have executive director roles, that are CEOs of their companies, and really being able to be a bit of a bridge to giving them advice about like, hey, yeah, you probably don't want to do this, or like, you need to be careful about this when it comes to just what you said, giving up power, and bringing in these people as a board or adding these people to your organization. And I think for me, it's hoping that my story can be a lesson and a cautionary tale, and even perhaps a motivation for other leaders, especially Black leaders and Black women in particular. So they know that if they get in this space, that they can be successful and overcome, and hopefully they won't get into make some of the same mistakes I did.
Well, and let's talk about it, right? Because like one, I do want to talk a little bit in this conversation, just kind of like lessons learned in terms of like board structure and rules and like how to really make sure that those things are, it's not about them necessarily having to edge in your favor, but that they don't leave you in a lurch or leave you, feeling
Vulnerable.
That's the way of vulnerable. Let's talk about this though, because, I took the time, right? And, before we had this conversation, I clicked around, I read, I tried to get as much little information I could, Black tech and Black founder Twitter and social, and this space is pretty small. But so let me ask this: as I looked at some of the complaints or the issues around what folks would allege, oh well, Kimberly she's running around and like it's hard to get a hold of her, or there were complaints and there were frustrations. I guess my question is like, is it reasonable that there may have been legitimate points of feedback and growth, but that did not necessarily rise to the point of you being suspended? Like, do you believe that you have things that you can work on and grow, but that don't necessarily mean that it translates to you being penalized in the way that you have? That's my question to you.
Absolutely. But I mean, I think that the truth of the matter is that every single founder does. Every single founder does. If we look at some of the latest, offerings on Uber and what's the name of it? WeWork. We will see,
Oh my gosh,
much.
we were.
Yeah, we will see much more egregious activities on those founder stories of our peers who are not people of color than you'll see, certainly than you'll see about me, but also from other leaders that come from marginalized communities. And I think the issue is that we are not given this. A friend of mine, another colleague, called it the spaciousness to have areas of growth as founders of color. We're not given that spaciousness. It's like, oh, like you are not perfect right here. Oh, throw them away. Like get them out of here. And that's not the way it should be. And especially for founders who are holding the weight of the world, often like us, we're holding the fate of our whole darn community on our shoulders, and also trying to run a business. Like how does that work? So like, you mean to tell me, like, I'm trying to get my whole team, which is under resourced and overtaxed, in terms of the work we need to do. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Oh, and our people over here are getting killed on the street.
Right.
And I'm supposed to get all this around. I'm supposed to be available like every time that you need. Like, how does that work? Tell me that, because I feel like I spent like 2 or 3 months of 2020 just trying to make sure we got what did you call those loans? A PPP loan, and I had to
Yeah.
do it all. And just because I didn't, that was before we started to get resources. I didn't know if I was going to keep my people. And so, like, I think that this notion that we are not giving room for growth and penalized, harshly, is what we see everywhere, not just in business. And we see it in the criminal justice system. We see it in the educational system. That was me back 50 years ago in the educational system, because I've always gonna talk back in class. Like,
Right.
I'm that person. Like, you tell me, even when I was 10, I'd be like, no, I'm not, miss, and I'm not gonna do the. And I would get in trouble for that. So like, the over penalization and criminalization and punishment for Black people is something that we have encountered for eons before I was even a notion on this earth. And we see that same thing reflected in the work world. And so the long-winded answer to your question is like, absolutely not. Do I think that, what I encountered was was it valid? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But is there room for me to grow as a leader? Of course, all leaders should be continually trying to grow and trying to get better. And the issue that I have is that is what the role of the board of directors is to do. You are there to support the founder. Yes, you are there to protect the organization, but a part of that, and your fiduciary responsibility, is to ensure that the leader has what he or she needs to run that organization. And I've said this in another interview, if you're not there to support the leader, what are you there for? That tells me that perhaps your motives are not as pure and on mission aligned as they should be.
Man. Because it's funny you went there, because that was going to be my follow-up. Is it feels like, you know, Black folk, not it feels like, the reality of the world. And of course, in the corporate space, this is not exclusive. This is inclusive of the corporate workplace. Is Black folks don't seem to, they do not have as much grace to mess up.
Mm-mm.
Right. I think like white folks, white adjacent folks, particularly white men, but white women too, are able to like fail up and
Mm-hmm.
fail up like exponentially up. Right.
Absolutely.
Folks are able to kind of like, they'll see like they're given every benefit of the doubt, and they're doing stuff like actually illegal and wrong. So like,
Right.
and so yeah, it is. And it's been my experience, like just in my own career, where it's like, man, like, okay, I made a mistake. And I remember like a quick side note. I remember when I was a consultant, this was years ago, and my coach was an older black woman. Because in consulting, everybody has a career coach, and that's to help drive whatever engagement, whatever. They really just kind of there to make sure you don't go too left or right. You kind of stay in the middle. But anyway, older black woman, and I made a couple of like typos. Like I wasn't good on like I would have typos or maybe just alignment things. Like my PowerPoints and presentations now are genuinely phenomenal. I would put them against anybody. But at the time, I was really not good at that. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember my coach was like, "You got to be perfect."
Mm-hmm.
That was your feedback. That was her feedback. You got to be perfect. And I said, "You're telling me that I have to be perfect at a job." She's like, "Yeah, you can't make mistakes." And I was like, "Okay, but what about it?" She's like, "No, you can't make mistakes." And like I realized the reality of that because of the way the white supremacy is set up, but also
Mm-hmm.
like we as black folks, black and brown, we internalize that, and
Absolutely.
that's violent. Like you cannot tell. I was like 20, I think I was like 25 at the time. You're telling a
Mm-hmm.
25-year-old black man, first generation professional, second generation reader, first generation college graduate, you have to be perfect, right? That's crazy.
Yeah.
And yet that's what we do. And then like, and so then when you make mistakes, there is no like there's no grace to like be coached and like, hey Zach, we're gonna sit you down over here and help you and do this for you and give you resources. No, actually, we're gonna take stuff away from you, actually. And
Yeah.
in fact, you might not even have a job.
Absolutely. Or even being given the benefit of the doubt first, to ask questions first and jump to those final conclusions later. So like in my case, in my scenario, I've never even been asked, by my board of directors, like, well, can you tell us what was going on with these folks? Why would they say those things? Nobody ever asked me to this day what actually was happening with these people. Like, what was going on with them? Like, can you help? They never asked. They just assumed that it was said, so it was correct. And I think that is like right in that notion that you said around, it's not just white people that penalize us harshly, when we err and make mistakes. We've internalized that trauma so much that we now become the oppressors of our own. And I think that's the unfortunate piece, is that we don't give each other grace you know, to make mistakes or just to be able to grow. And I think that's some of the healing that needs to happen and needs to occur. I remember back at the latter part of last year, I was having a meeting with some of my senior leadership team, and that morning I think I had to run some errands and do some things before I got there where everyone else was meeting. And I got there like just on time on the dot, and I was like rushed to my office to put all my stuff down. And I'm presenting first that morning, and so I'm also in my head trying to think about what I'm going to say and how I need to have this message land. And then we got together, after I just went to my office, didn't really say anything to the team, and then we came back together. And I was like, hey, first before we get started, let me just apologize for just running in, just sort of waving and going straight to my office. I was like, I had to do da 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 this morning, and I was just really in my head trying to get myself aligned to what I needed to say and what I needed to share. And I was just really focused. So, please forgive me for not just, stopping in and being, collegial, like right when I came in the door. I'm trying to get myself in the mindset to, do this meeting. And one of my team members was like, hey, like, I appreciate that. Like, nobody else has ever told me sorry for how they show up and how their mind is set up. Like, no other manager has ever done that. Now, I'm making an assumption that perhaps most of her other managers were not people of color, but it was just that notion, like you said, that if I had been a white man, like these things that I'm penalized for will probably not even be an issue. But because I'm showing up as, a black woman in a certain way, or a black man in your case, oh, no, no, no. You can't, you got to get it 110% correct on the first time. And you are no room for error. or being an actual human being. And I think that's unfair. And not only unfair, I think it's unhealthy. And it's not a productive way for us to be able to move forward and move, I would say, purpose forward and missions forward as leaders of color.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't just say amen. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
because like, and I remember like just even, and I'm still in therapy from just like years of internalized perfectionism and pressure and artificial urgency.
Mm.
All these things that we're like conditioned to be and ways that we're conditioned to show up. It's harmful, and it has lingering effects in terms of how you just engage other people. So I 100% agree with you about how unhealthy it is. So let's do this. We've been talking. I'm confident we could go on probably for another hour or so. But here's what I'd like to close with. What are three things that you would tell new Black founders as it pertains to helping them create an environment where they can grow, but also not be vulnerable, to use your language?
Mm-hmm.
Because vulnerability, I think also I'm because you used the word, and I've been thinking before we go too much further. I think it's interesting because like I do believe we're supposed to be vulnerable in terms of allowing ourselves to be coached and to grow. But I believe when you correct me if I'm wrong, when you say vulnerable, I think you mean in terms of literally like putting yourself at risk of losing your position.
Right.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I'd love to just hear any type of, if you had to like kind of boil it down to 3 points of advice for new Black founders as they move forward, like what would those things be?
So one of the things I've been doing lately is, and I hope to be doing in the future even more, is having conversations like this, like those questions and coaching questions to Black founders and women in leadership as well. And the things that I say with these three things that a leader will need. I just had a conversation with an amazing sister yesterday that I think is really phenomenal as an innovator. And I was like, you need to build your board of advisors for her. It's a board of advisors as she's building this company. And I was like, they need to be people that you trust and know things that you don't. But more so than anything, these are people that you have a personal relationship with, you trust them to have your back when you are not in the room, and certainly when you are. like, and you need to entrust them explicitly because those people are there to open doors for you and as well as to be parachute, to be that safe space, that safe landing. And as one of the most important decisions that you are probably ever making your business, period. I think another thing is and I think I talked about this, maybe I tweet a lot, as you well know, but maybe it was in a conversation, but maybe it was a tweet. Like someone had made a post, I think the other day on Twitter around, they interviewed, this 8 or 10 CEOs who had grew businesses to 8 figures, and um, none of them had ever fired anyone ever. And he found that to be odd. And he's like, but they said that, they probably should have fired some of these folks that, on their path to growing these 8 figure businesses. And this whole notion of hire slow, fire fast, maybe it's not valid because that's not what these CEOs had done. And I was like, I can tell you as a CEO who has grown a business to 8 figures that is true. Their experience is true because it was mine. So when I look back at it, you know, I certainly had situations where something in my gut, not even just with hiring and firing, it could even be with, selecting a board members, but certainly in hiring and who I was bringing in, or certain business decisions that something didn't feel right, like there was a flag, or maybe in the interview, or a candidate would say something, or just something in my gut that did not feel right. And I would second guess myself and still make the decision, even though like something in my intuition, my natural instinct told me, this doesn't feel right. Never do that, because that voice that's telling you something's not right is for protection, and you should follow it. So like, I know we always say this saying of like, trust your gut, but I don't believe we always do that, because we can talk ourselves, especially as leaders and founders and you can talk yourself out of a lot of things. Don't do it. If you have something, trust that gut instinct. Something doesn't feel right, something doesn't sound right, all the I's that don't feel dotted, T's not crossed. Trust your gut instinct and keep it moving. And I would say, last but not least, like continuing to be on this path of growth, growth mindset. This is often taught in schools to our kids, this notion of growth mindset. But I think as a leader, like we also have to continually be in this pathway of growing. Like I am a Gen Xer and I'm proud of that. But I can tell you that what I know and where I was taught as early in my career to do things as a Gen Xer is very different than what works in the workforce now with millennials, and certainly not with Gen Z and this alpha generation that's coming up next. And being able to be flexible enough to relearn patterns that you have been taught years ago of how to do things, just like reflecting on our conversation earlier about, shared power and collective authority and a Tao and, whatever. We have to continue to be on this path of learning. We have to consistently push against these notions of how we think she should be. And we should be gracious enough to understand that we don't know it all, and the world is continuing to change, and we got to change with it if we want to stay in the game.
I love it. Kimberly, thank you for being a guest. I really appreciate the fact that we're able to finally connect. And
me too.
I hope that our listeners are hearing. I hope they picked up something. I've learned a lot, and I just really appreciate you sharing your story. Look, I offer this sometimes to, I guess, is there anybody you want to call out, create some beef on Living Corporate just for the sake of clicks? Would you like to stir up any additional drama or mess?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to stir up no mess. But I will say this. I will end with this. Like, for anybody who's out there and listening, they've been through a thing, especially if they, like are a founder, leader, business owner, understand that trouble don't last always. Everything happens for a reason. And the best advice that I can give you is keep moving onward and upward.
Come on now. Let's make sure to talk soon. You're a friend of the show. You're welcome back anytime. Whatever it is, as your journey with Black Girls Code, and whatever it is you got going on, Kimberly, please know, like, you have a space here, after you talk to CBS and Fox News and TV One and BET and everybody else, and you want to come to us, just know we have a slot for you, okay?
I appreciate you, Jack. I appreciate that.
All right, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And we're back. Yo, shout out to Kimberly Bryant. Shout out to Black Girls Code. Shout out to all Black and brown tech and non-tech founders. Everywhere you're needed, you're appreciated. Make sure that you build yourself a personal set of directors, board of directors, that will help you, look out for you, and advocate for you, and make sure that you're protecting yourself while also giving yourself as much space possible to grow. It's a really unique space to be in, like just this world, and hopefully you're able to pick up on the nuance of that discussion. Again, I can't thank Kimberly enough. And until next time, y'all, this has been Zach. You listen to Living Corporate. Make sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Till next time, peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.